And hello, everybody. Welcome back to part two. This time we kick it off with communications. Not that hard, but really, notice this point. 90% of what you will do is communication. Here's a funny, pause it and review it at your leisure. Of course, like anything, we start out by planning. So we'll make a communications management plan. And the communications management plan will address how you're going to communicate with stakeholders along the way. Here's a sample. I love the way they do this. And so these are things you would want to consider in developing your own communications management plan. Of course, project websites can provide a centralized way of delivering these documents. You can also use blogs, SharePoint, file system, etc. along the way with your team members because they're probably not located where you are at. So this would be a sample project website that you may want to consider standing up. Of course, you'd want a web developer on your team as well. Now, in addition to comm management, who do you communicate with? You communicate with stakeholders. That's the point, right? So stakeholder management, they're hand in glove. If you think communications, you should always instantly think stakeholders. If you think stakeholders, you should think, how am I going to communicate with them to best achieve the results and gain favor for my project throughout? Because people will, even if they favor it early, may change their mind. Stay with it, right? And so you want to engage stakeholders. You've got to get in there. And so you want to make an engagement plan. Some people like PowerPoint. Some people don't like attachments on emails. Some people like communications early in the morning before work starts. Some people make their best decisions in the evening. What will be best for your project, right? You need to figure these out. What are these stakeholders' needs? What are their concerns? What are their risks along the way? So create this stakeholder engagement plan. This would be a sample where you have the stakeholder here. What is their power? If it's high, man, and they're supportive, they may not always be. You want to stay on top of that. Right now they're a champion. Good, keep them a champion. What about Lucy? High. And she is leading. That's awesome. But Ryan is low, medium. They're resistant. You don't have to move them to supportive, but you at least want to move them to neutral, right? And how are you going to do that? So that's why communications management plan and stakeholder engagement plan work hand in glove. Think of one, you should think of the other all the time. Now, risk management, this is what it's all about. It's about reducing risk. Risk, in a single word, is an uncertainty. That's it. Risk is an uncertainty. We don't know if it's going to happen. But here's what PMI says. The Project Management Institute says it's either a threat or it's an opportunity, or it's negative and it's positive, right? We tend, as human beings, to think of risks as threats. But we want to, as project managers, to also look for opportunities and make them happen in risk management. So a very important point there along the way. Okay, whoa, what happened there? Okay, we are back. So risk management plan is going to define how you're going to manage risk throughout the project, right? And so in risk management, you will want to consider contingency plans, for example. So a contingency plan means I've identified the risk. I've also identified that it's high probability and or high impact to my project. Now I'm going to build a contingency plan in case that risk happens. Remember, risk is an uncertainty. What about a fallback plan? Well, these are developed for risks that have a high impact on meeting the objectives, and they're put into effect if, notice if, attempts to reduce the risk are not effective. So what's a fallback plan? It says, I put my contingency plan in place and it didn't work. Okay, then what am I going to do? That's a fallback plan, right? So I take this contingency plan and I need money to execute it. That would be called contingency reserves. Contingency reserves are is the money to execute the contingency plan. What are management reserves? Well, that's money that okay, so let me take a step back. In a contingency reserve, remember I said up top, in the contingency plan, we've identified the risk, yet we need to put money aside for it. That's a contingency reserve. You know what a management reserve is? It says I didn't identify the risk and we didn't know it's coming, but bam, here it is. And so it's not yours. You have to go to management, or essentially your sponsor, to justify and request funds. You do not manage management reserves. You manage contingency reserves, which are for identified risks. Management reserves are unidentified risks. You didn't see them coming, and so you didn't plan on them, and here they are. Okay? Here's a simple risk management plan. I like it. Good to pause, kind of consider it along the way. Now, the first thing you want to do after you build the risk management plan is identify risks along the way. So you want to make a risk register, right? And what's a register? It's just a list, right? We had a stakeholder register. That's a list of stakeholders and their needs. What's a risk register? It's a list of risks. So you'll sit down with the team, you'll brainstorm, you'll do some interviews with key stakeholders, and you will identify all. You might do a document review, like an online Google search, right, of risk. You might pull old project plans off the shelf and look at the risks that they faced. Lots of ways to identify the risk, but put them on your risk register and begin to assess them and begin to assign people to them. Now, a risk event, as I've already mentioned, is a specific and uncertain. We don't know if a risk is going to happen. But if it does, it can be either negative, we call that a threat, or positive, we call that an opportunity. How can I make this opportunity happen? If I'm building a house and I want to save money by having cheaper lumber, how can I make that happen? Well, maybe I go down and work a deal at the local lumber store to buy all of it up front. They love bulk, right? That would be a risk, but an opportunity, okay? And then, of course, you want to think of in terms of the individual risks, which are the threat or an opportunity. But you also want to think in terms of overall project risks, right? So a single risk, a threat or an opportunity, may be, I think I've got it. But what if you combine a threat, and a threat in your and you only have one opportunity in a sense of overall project risk, right? That may change your site picture a little bit. And so, what went wrong, right? Not identifying risks or taking the time to perform adequate risk planning can lead to disaster, right? And there are some examples there. They were also spelled out in the course book. Now, after risk management, you also want to consider, I'm sorry, is part of risk management. There is qualitative analysis. Now, why do we do qualitative analysis? After we've identified all the risks, we do qualitative analysis. That's always next. And we do qualitative analysis for every risk in the risk register. Why? Because the only point to qualitative risk assessment is to reprioritize the risk register, put things in order based on the probability that they'll happen and the impact if they do happen. And so one way to do that is to do a sample probability and impact matrix for each risk, where you have the probability here, low, medium, high, you get your team to vote, and the impact, low, medium, or high. And you can put the various risks along in this probability and impact matrix. After risk planning, we did identify risks, which we created a risk register. Then we did qualitative risk analysis, which was only meant to prioritize our risks. Now we'll do quantitative risk analysis. But here's the difference. On qualitative risk analysis that we just finished, we did it for every risk because it was about putting all the risks in a priority order. In quantitative is hard. It requires a lot of numbers and crunching and time. You only want to do this for the top risks in your risk register that have been reprioritized based on qualitative analysis. So qualitative analysis you will do for every risk to make sure it gets in its right order. But quantitative analysis, I'm only going to do for my final big risks that I want to develop a contingency reserve plan for. Now, Monte Carlo analysis, that's one way to do that. That's a really slick computer program, and you can put all of your project information into it, and it's like Monte Carlo where they gamble. It will tell you the probability of events happening, and you can plan against that. Kind of cool. So now, if a risk does happen, what are you going to do? Well, if a risk is a threat, you can escalate it, you can avoid it, you can accept it, transfer, or mitigate it. If a risk is an opportunity, you can also escalate it, but you can exploit it as well. You can share it, say, within a joint venture with another company. You can enhance the opportunity, or you can just accept it as it comes and be happy with it, right? So these are some responses. How do you respond to a risk? Here you go, whether it's a threat or an opportunity. I love the media snapshot, but that is covered thoroughly in the book as well as the video highlights. So the key is, at the very beginning, after we do risk management planning, we'll develop a risk register. It's a list of risks, right, that can happen along our project. And then as a review, we did qualitative risk analysis, which means we took the risks in the risk register and reprioritize them based on probability of happening and impact if they do. So this would be a sample risk register. You can pause and review on your own. I have one also online that is part of the assignment. So you also have risk-related contract decisions, right? Everything creates a risk. In fact, we've said, and I'll re-emphasize, in a predictive/waterfall project, you are out to avoid, minimize, reduce, or eliminate risks, right? It is risk-driven. It's a very important section. And so contracts also create a risk because you lose some control. And so that leads us to procurement management, or another way of saying it is contract management, right? You aren't in charge anymore of the contract. The procurement manager for your company is the only one who, other than the CEO, who can commit funds, right? You can't. So you have to have a good working relationship with the company's procurement manager. Yet, you, the project manager, are still responsible for the project itself. That's a struggle, and it will take up some of your time. One of the first things you want to do is do a make or buy analysis, right? Can the company make the item, the widget you need? Maybe, but maybe it is more cost effective to buy it in a procurement, right? So you have to make that decision through a make or buy analysis. And here's a chart where somebody did a make or buy analysis. What if the project was only 15 days, right? Well, would you want to, you notice the crossover point, buy versus lease, is at 30 days, right? So anytime prior to that would be one decision. Anytime after that would change the results. So it may depend on how long your project is planned for. So this is a good sample make or buy analysis. You can pause and review it at your leisure. Of course, like any knowledge area, we start off with a plan. So we need a contract management plan, or in this case, we call it a procurement management plan along the way. And this is a document that describes how you're going to manage contracting throughout your project. The Federal Acquisition Regulations are required for U.S. government contracts, not for commercial contracts, but they're a good guide to commercial contracts. I'm going to pause here, and we are going to come back with the final session for this week.